the art of strategy, true victory is never loud. It doesn't come from the clash of swords, the roar of armies, or the spectacle of conquest. The most dangerous victories are silent, achieved without battle, without resistance, and without leaving a single scar on your own hands. Sun Tzu understood this. He didn't teach men how to fight. He taught them how to win without fighting. And those who mastered that principle became untouchable. To destroy an enemy without fighting is to enter their mind and dismantle their certainty. You do not strike their body, you infect their will. You erode their confidence, confuse their sense of purpose, and make them question the ground they stand on. Once doubt takes root, it spreads like rot beneath their armor. The war is over long before they realize it began. Every powerful strategist throughout history understood this invisible war. The battlefield wasn't made of land, it was made of perception. Napoleon conquered Europe by reshaping how others saw him. Genghis Khan made his enemies surrender before battle by building a myth of invincibility. Even in modern life, the same principle rules. You don't overpower competitors, you make them irrelevant. You don't argue with opponents, you outposition them until their voice fades into the noise. This channel reveals the hidden laws of strategy and control. Subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. But this art has a dark side, one that requires emotional detachment and psychological precision. Because when you seek to destroy an enemy without fighting, you are not confronting their strength. You are manipulating their mind, their fears, their ego. You are weaponizing invisibility. The first law of invisible destruction is undermining certainty. Every strong person relies on a foundation, a belief in their ability, their strategy, their moral rightness. Shatter that, and the rest collapses. You can do this through silence, through calculated withdrawal, through unpredictable actions that make them question what you'll do next. Predictability is control. Chaos is disarmament. When they can no longer predict your moves, they begin fighting shadows. Sun Tzu wrote, "To subdue the enemy without fighting is the acme of skill." This isn't a poetic line, it's a psychological manual. To subdue means to conquer from within. It's not about intimidation, it's about dismantling structure. And in the modern world, structure isn't made of walls. It's made of attention, emotion, and belief. The one who controls those elements controls the field. Look around. Wars of attention are fought every day, in business, politics, relationships. People don't lose because they're weaker. They lose because their attention is hijacked, their emotions redirected, and their focus scattered. The modern general doesn't carry a sword. He carries silence, restraint, and timing. You destroy an enemy's strength by turning it against them. The proud fall through their pride. The impulsive destroy themselves through reaction. The loudest ones exhaust their energy shouting into the void. A true strategist doesn't meet power with power. He gives his opponent a mirror and lets them burn under their own reflection. Imagine this: your enemy expects confrontation. They prepare defenses, sharpen their words, tighten their armor. But you give them nothing, no reaction, no validation, no engagement. You turn the field into emptiness. And in that void, their aggression has nowhere to go but inward. They implode under the weight of their own anticipation. That's the silent kill, the moment when the enemy destroys himself trying to find you. Restraint, then, becomes a form of dominance. Silence becomes communication. Patience becomes a blade sharper than steel. Those who can wait while others act blindly always gain the advantage. Sun Tzu called it the formless form, the ability to remain invisible until victory is already certain. When you act only when the enemy is disoriented, you never lose. But mastering this approach requires something brutal: the willingness to let go of emotion. You cannot destroy enemies without fighting if your ego demands recognition. You must act without needing to be seen. You must influence without claiming credit. You must win without anyone realizing you were even playing. This is the part few understand. The dark side of restraint is not passive, it's surgical. It requires the patience to watch others stumble into the traps you've designed, the strength to appear indifferent while your influence spreads unseen. Invisibility isn't absence. It's dominance disguised as silence. The second law is strategic invisibility. The more visible your intentions, the more power you lose. Every emotion you display, every desire you confess, becomes a handle someone can use to control you. The strategist's mind is like water, clear, calm, reflecting everything but revealing nothing. When your motives are unreadable, your opponents waste energy trying to interpret what isn't there. And energy wasted is energy surrendered. The greatest conquerors in life, not just in war, but in power, negotiation, and relationships, master the art of being unreadable. They let others project assumptions, false confidence, and illusions of control. Then, at the right moment, they shift direction and break the illusion completely. By the time the enemy realizes what happened, it's too late. To destroy an enemy without fighting, you must understand their psychological structure. Every human being is built from patterns, habits of thought, emotional reflexes, predictable reactions. The skilled strategist studies these patterns like a scientist observing a specimen. He doesn't hate his enemy, he understands him. Because the moment you understand a person's emotional triggers, you no longer need to confront them. You can steer them. Most people are enslaved by their need to be right, to be seen, to win. They crave acknowledgement. So give them what they crave until it blinds them. Let them believe they've won small battles while you take the war. Feed their ego subtly, make them feel in control, and they'll lower their guard willingly. That's not cruelty, it's precision. You're not destroying them, you're allowing their illusions to do it for you. And what about you, the strategist? You must be the opposite of what they expect. When they expect anger, show calm. When they expect retreat, show stillness. When they expect words, give silence. When they expect surrender, give patience. You become unpredictable not by chaos, but by control. True unpredictability is discipline masked as detachment. Many confuse this with weakness, but weakness is loud, emotional, erratic. True strength is invisible because it doesn't need to prove itself. You can walk away from battles others die to fight, not because you're afraid, but because you already know the outcome. You've learned that energy spent on conflict is energy stolen from control. Control, that is the true essence of the dark side of the art of war. Control of self, control of timing, control of perception. The person who controls these three elements doesn't need to fight. Others fight for him, against themselves, against illusions he quietly constructed. Sun Tzu's words echo through centuries because they apply to every dimension of power, mental, social, strategic. To destroy without fighting is to dominate the unseen world of emotion and perception. It's to live 2 layers deeper than everyone else, while they drown in surface reactions. And that's where the transformation begins, when you realize that true victory has nothing to do with force and everything to do with influence. The next time someone tries to pull you into conflict, remember, every reaction is a gift to your opponent. Every silence is a step toward dominance. You don't need to fight to win. You just need to know what game you're truly playing and make sure they don't. The most terrifying victories are not earned on the battlefield. They are engineered in silence. A war won without fighting is not a matter of luck or timing, but of psychological domination. To truly destroy an enemy without confrontation, you must master 3 invisible weapons: perception, patience, and persuasion. Together, they form a system of control so subtle that your opponent believes every step they take was their own choice. This is the deep machinery of manipulation that Sun Tzu hinted at but never revealed explicitly, the ability to create illusions that control behavior. A strategist doesn't force submission. He designs circumstances that make submission feel natural. He doesn't push, he guides. He doesn't demand obedience. He frames the world so that defiance seems irrational. The essence of this lies in perception. What people believe determines what they will defend and what they will destroy. When you control perception, you control the limits of another's imagination, and therefore the limits of their action. Consider how empires rise and fall. Armies matter, but belief moves mountains. People don't fight for truth, they fight for what they believe is true. So, the master of invisible war doesn't attack armies. He attacks beliefs. He spreads whispers that seed doubt, ideas that corrode loyalty, symbols that divide once united groups. And as the enemy turns inward, confused and paranoid, you remain untouched, because the war now exists only in their minds. To destroy an enemy without fighting, you must first make them destroy themselves. You must redirect their aggression, their ego, their ambition, all the things they rely on for strength, and turn them into traps. The proud leader who cannot tolerate disrespect will crumble under humiliation. The impulsive rival who needs validation will overextend themselves chasing applause. The overconfident enemy who believes they understand you will make fatal assumptions. The wise strategist does not stop these self-destructive impulses. He nurtures them. This is the dark geometry of control. You don't resist their movements. You absorb them. Like water shaping stone, your patience wears them down over time. Every reaction you avoid becomes energy they waste. Every silence you hold becomes a mirror that reflects their own fear. Patience, then, is not passivity. It is an active strategy of erosion. You wait not because you're weak, but because you understand that time is the sharpest weapon. When others rush, they reveal. When they reveal, they become predictable. When they're predictable, they become yours. Sun Tzu said, "When you are near, make the enemy believe you are far away. When you are far away, make him believe you are near." These aren't just tactical instructions, they are psychological ones. The principle is disorientation. Keep the enemy uncertain about your position, your intention, your strength. Confusion breeds fear. Fear breeds mistakes. Mistakes breed surrender. Every powerful manipulator in history has followed this sequence. They control the narrative, distort the map, and let their opponents get lost chasing ghosts. A skilled strategist can turn even weakness into a weapon simply by making others misinterpret it. What seems like retreat is often bait. What looks like silence is often surveillance. To master this form of control, you must become fluent in emotional intelligence, not the soft kind preached in self-help books, but the ruthless kind used by kings, generals, and negotiators. You must be able to sense the hidden motives behind people's words, the insecurity behind their aggression, the fear behind their confidence. Every person you meet is carrying invisible wounds and cravings, and those are the strings that move them. When you see these strings clearly, you no longer need to fight. You can simply pull. The art of pulling these strings lies in psychological leverage. It's not enough to know someone's weakness. You must position yourself as the solution to it. If your enemy seeks recognition, offer them flattery. If they crave security, offer them false stability. If they need control, let them think they have it. The moment they depend on you emotionally or strategically, the battle is over. They'll protect your interests without realizing it. This is why the most dangerous strategists are often charming, patient, and seemingly harmless. They smile while they disarm you. They agree while they study you. They praise while they position themselves above you. Their warfare is invisible, a game of psychological chess played in slow motion. The third weapon, persuasion, is the final stage of invisible war. Once the enemy is uncertain and emotionally dependent, persuasion seals the victory. But this persuasion isn't about words. It's about framing reality. People rarely see the world as it is. They see the world as it is presented to them. Control the frame and you control behavior. For example, if you frame retreat as wisdom, your followers will admire your caution. If you frame aggression as courage, they'll justify your cruelty. If you frame silence as mystery, they'll fill it with meaning that benefits you. The power to define perception is the power to rule without force. In business, the same laws apply. The competitor who constantly reacts to your moves has already lost. The leader who stays composed while others scramble gains silent authority. The company that redefines the market doesn't have to destroy rivals. It makes them obsolete. Destruction without fighting is simply evolution accelerated by precision. But there is danger in wielding such power. The line between strategy and manipulation is razor-thin, and those who play this game too long risk becoming prisoners of their own illusion. To manipulate perception is to live surrounded by masks. Eventually, even you forget which one is yours. That is the paradox of the dark side of the art of war. You can destroy enemies without fighting, but you must never destroy yourself in the process. The more you control others, the more detached you must remain. If you begin to enjoy control, it controls you. That's why Sun Tzu taught restraint as the highest virtue. Because the strategist who seeks control for power's sake becomes predictable, and predictability is death. The goal is not domination. The goal is influence, quiet, invisible, and precise. Influence that bends reality without leaving fingerprints. To achieve that level of mastery, you must train your perception constantly. Learn to observe without reacting. Listen without agreeing. Watch how people reveal their insecurities through their tone, their timing, their over-explanations. The world is an ocean of psychological tells, and those who remain still can see the ripples others create. Control begins internally. You cannot manipulate others until you master your own mind. When you feel anger rising, observe it. When you feel fear, analyze it. When you feel the urge to prove something, silence it. Every time you control your emotional impulse, you gain leverage over those who can't. That is the secret no general, politician, or negotiator will ever admit. The one who feels less always wins more. There's a moment in every conflict, a point of tension where both sides are watching each other, waiting for someone to act. Most people can't endure that silence. They rush, they reveal, they self-destruct, but the strategist waits. He lets the silence become unbearable, and in that silence, control shifts. The first to act loses the advantage. This principle applies to every realm, from boardrooms to relationships, from politics to personal rivalries. The side that controls pace controls the game. You don't have to fight to destroy an enemy. You only have to slow the tempo until their impulses destroy them. That's how you win wars without fighting. You turn time itself into your ally. You make patience your fortress. You let arrogance burn itself out. And once the enemy has exhausted themselves, when they've revealed their fears, exposed their motives, and drained their energy, you strike, not with violence, but with finality. A single, calculated move that collapses what they spent years building. Could be a revelation that ruins their reputation. A withdrawal that leaves them powerless. A truth exposed at the perfect moment. That final strike is never emotional, it's mathematical. But the true beauty of this art lies not in destruction, but in understanding. Once you master these principles, you realize that most enemies aren't worth destroying, they're worth observing. The more you understand people, the less you need to fight them. You start to see that victory doesn't come from crushing others, but from transcending their games altogether. This is where the art of war becomes the art of mind. When you reach that level, even destruction becomes unnecessary, because you've already won the only war that matters, the war within. Power, when refined to its purest form, becomes invisible. It no longer needs to announce itself, to dominate, to shout. It simply is. The strategist who reaches this level no longer plays games of deception or control. He becomes the environment itself. Everything and everyone moves around him, unaware that they are following his design. That is the final evolution of Sun Tzu's philosophy. To destroy your enemies without fighting, until the concept of enemy itself dissolves. But to reach this state, you must walk through darkness first. You must understand manipulation, not to use it blindly, but to transcend it. You must experience the temptation of power and learn to hold it without becoming consumed. The dark side of the art of war isn't about cruelty. It's about clarity. It reveals what human beings are driven by when stripped of illusions. People fight for survival, attention, validation, love, respect. They call it war, but it's hunger disguised as honor. And when you see through that, when you understand that every conflict is born from unmet desire, you stop being part of the game. You begin to orchestrate it from above. This is what separates the ordinary from the strategic. Most people move emotionally, they react, defend, justify, and crave to be seen as right. But the strategist doesn't care to be right, he cares to be effective. The crowd seeks justice. The strategist seeks outcome. One plays for ego, the other for eternity. When you stop fighting for recognition, something remarkable happens. Others start yielding to you unconsciously, because silence unnerves them, indifference disarms them, and consistency overpowers them. You don't destroy them with force. You make their noise echo into emptiness until they realize they're arguing with a ghost. That is why true dominance often feels like disappearance. The most powerful presence is absence, the type that haunts a room long after you've left it. That's not mysticism. It's psychology. When you no longer need to be seen, you become unpredictable, and unpredictability creates fear. Fear creates submission. Submission creates order. But beware, power obtained through fear is fragile. Power obtained through understanding endures. The strategist learns to move beyond manipulation and use perception as medicine, not poison. To disarm, not to enslave. To enlighten, not to humiliate. Because the higher the mastery, the deeper the compassion that follows. This is the paradox few ever reach. Control and freedom are the same when rooted in awareness. You begin by controlling others to feel powerful. You end by controlling yourself to become untouchable. You begin by manipulating perception. You end by transcending it. Sun Tzu's wisdom was never truly about war. War was the metaphor. The real battlefield was always the mind, the space where fear, ego, and impulse collide. When he wrote, "The greatest victory is that which requires no battle," he wasn't describing conquest, he was describing mastery of emotion. Imagine two rulers. One conquers nations with armies, bending people through violence. The other conquers time itself, his influence lasting centuries, his lessons whispered in languages that didn't exist when he was alive. Which one truly won? The sword fades, the mind endures, and this is the ultimate lesson of the dark side. What is destroyed through force returns through resistance, but what is destroyed through understanding never returns. To destroy your enemies without fighting is to dismantle their illusions so deeply that even if they rise again, they can never oppose you the same way. You've rewritten their perception. You've planted seeds that grow in their absence. This form of warfare is everywhere, invisible but absolute. Look at history. Revolutions begin not with violence, but with ideas. Empires crumble not from invasion, but from disillusionment. Relationships end not from conflict, but from clarity. The most fatal blow in any war is realization. And that is why wisdom is the final weapon. Knowledge makes violence obsolete. But to wield it properly, you must purge your own corruption. Because every strategist faces a dangerous threshold. The moment he realizes he can control outcomes, he is tempted to use that power for pride. That's the trap. You begin to manipulate not for strategy, but for self-worship. You start seeing people as pieces, not souls. You stop listening and start performing. And slowly, the strategist becomes the tyrant. The tyrant always loses, not because someone defeats him, but because he becomes predictable. Ego makes patterns, and patterns make targets. To remain invisible, you must remain humble. Humility is camouflage. It allows you to move through life unnoticed, while others expose themselves trying to impress. True mastery hides behind ordinariness. You walk through crowds as if you belong to no one, yet everyone bends unconsciously to your tempo. You may think this sounds mystical, but it's mathematical. Every social system, a company, a friendship, a family, a kingdom operates on patterns of emotional exchange. The one who observes these patterns without reacting becomes the architect. The moment you react, you become part of someone else's design. And that's why silence isn't weakness. It's awareness in its purest form. The silence of the mind allows you to see the map of every movement. Words reveal intentions. Silence reveals truth. The great strategist knows when to speak and when to disappear. He knows that some enemies are best destroyed not by force, but by letting time expose them. Arrogance collapses under its own weight. Lies decay without maintenance. Weakness feeds on attention. The most devastating blow you can deliver to your enemy is indifference, because it starves them of relevance. You don't destroy them. You let their need for war consume them. That's the paradoxical beauty of Sun Tzu's philosophy. Victory through absence, power through stillness, control through surrender. Every line in The Art of War is not about domination, but about transformation, the process of turning chaos into clarity and enemies into teachers. The strategist's journey begins with manipulation and ends with self-realization. You start by learning how to conquer minds. You finish by freeing your own. Because the greatest illusion of all is the idea that control comes from others. It doesn't. It begins and ends with you. When you master your reactions, you master the invisible threads that bind human behavior. When you can endure silence without anxiety, loss without panic, chaos without breaking, you've already won the war that most never even see. The art of war, in its deepest sense, is a mirror. It reflects not the battlefield, but the human condition. It teaches that conflict is inevitable, but suffering is optional. That power is not about domination, but direction. And that destruction, when necessary, can be merciful if it awakens understanding. So how do you destroy your enemies without fighting? You outlast them in patience. You outthink them in clarity. You outgrow them in silence. And when the dust settles, you realize they were never your true enemies, only reflections of the parts of you that had yet to evolve. Once you understand that war ends forever, the mind becomes your only weapon. The world becomes your field. Every obstacle becomes a lesson. Every opponent becomes a teacher. Sun Tzu's dark wisdom wasn't meant to turn you into a manipulator. It was meant to turn you into a master. One who no longer reacts to the world, but designs it internally. One who doesn't fight for control because he is control. The final law is this: he who conquers himself can never be conquered. Because once your mind is disciplined, emotion obeys. Once emotion obeys, perception aligns. And once perception aligns, reality follows. That is the true art of war, not the art of killing, but the art of awakening. So when they provoke you, stay still. When they lie about you, stay silent. When they underestimate you, stay patient. Because while they burn their energy fighting shadows, you will be building empires in the unseen. Victory doesn't need to be declared. It only needs to be inevitable. The war is over the moment you realize there was never a need to fight it. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still confuses reaction with power, and tell me in the comments what lesson you'll carry into your next silent battle.